Okay, I think we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's insightful webinar, Understanding Nutrition Care Components of the InterRAI LTCF, hosted by the Ontario Seniors Nutrition and Advocacy Committee, OSNAC. My name is Tara Fab, and I am your moderator for this event. Next slide, please. So before we dive in, let's cover some housekeeping rules for the session. To ensure a smooth experience, we've arranged for audience cameras and microphones to be turned off during the session. The chat feature is disabled, but don't worry, we've got a fantastic 15-minute Q&A session at the end planned just for you. Please hold your questions until the end, as we may end up answering them for you throughout the presentation. Given our large audience, we might not be able to address every question, but we will definitely do our best. To help streamline the questions, please refrain from asking duplicate questions in the Q&A box. We may group questions by theme to cover as much as possible, and we will attempt to send out a summary document afterward, time permitting. Please note that the webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the OSNAC website in the coming days. For those collecting CS&M points, this will count as 1 point under clinical nutrition, and there will be a question in the survey at the end of the presentation to input your name and CS&M number. We value your feedback, so please do complete the short evaluation at the end. Next slide, please.
So before we get into the content of today's webinar, I just want to review the disclaimer. The information presented in this webinar is accurate at the time of its airing. However, any subsequent guidance or changes based on applicable laws, regulations, or governing bodies takes precedence over the information shared during the webinar. This webinar features multiple presenters, including third-party participants and co-hosts. The views and opinions expressed by such presenters are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views, policies, or positions of Point Click Care. These perspectives should not be interpreted as advice, guidance, or endorsement from Point Click Care. The viewers of this webinar should understand the importance of seeking independent legal counsel or other qualified professional advice before making any decisions. It is essential to exercise independent judgment and consult with professional advisors to assess the appropriateness and legality of the information provided. The information and views expressed represent those of third-party consulting experts and co-hosts and should not, under any circumstances, be construed as legal advice from Point Click Care to individuals or any other party. Point Click Care disclaims responsibility or liability from any reliance on information provided by third-party presenters.
Awesome, thanks, Sarah. To start, I'm going to share some information about who OSNAC is. OSNAC was established in 2020. It was previously known as the Dietitians of Canada Ontario Long-Term Care Action Group. OSNAC is run by volunteers. We have an amazing group of registered dietitians and nutrition managers, as well as others working at the corporate and frontline levels in long-term care homes in the senior sector. Our purpose is to advocate, educate, and empower to strive for updated regulations to meet the changing needs of our seniors, to enhance person-centered care and quality of life, and to advocate for flexibility at the home level. Next slide, please. So we would like to provide a massive thank you to our partners and presenters. We truly appreciate your support, and without them, none of this would be possible. So on the screen, you will definitely see some of our friends and sponsors that do support OSNAC on a regular basis. Next slide, please. So again, the purpose of OSNAC is to advocate, educate, and empower, focusing on quality of care. We advocate for change to support long-term care homes and residents based on regulations, staffing, and funding. We educate to raise awareness about the importance of nutrition and resident dining experiences and consistent interpretation of the regulations. And we empower all levels to advocate for change. Next slide, please. So on the screen, you will see some of OSNAC's partnerships. Specifically, today we would like to acknowledge Point Click Care and CIHI for your support with this session. On today's agenda, first, CIHI will go through the InterRAI LTCF for dietary. CIHI, again, is the Canadian Institute for Health Information. Then Point Click Care will take us through a live demo. And then OSNAC will review the best practice document we have available, to support with the InterRAI LTCF changes. So without further ado, let's introduce our fantastic speakers who will be sharing their expertise today. We have Patricia Hanna, Clinical Specialist for Standards and Engagement, joining us from the Canadian Institute for Health Information, also known as CIHI. We also have Sarah Bendo, Director of Canadian Health Strategy at Point Click Care, and Leanne Carroll, who is a registered dietitian with over 20 years of experience in long-term care and a volunteer with OSNAC. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Patricia to get us started.
Great, thank you so much. So next slide, please. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to go over the sections of the assessment that dietary professionals may be completing or reviewing in the context of a person's nutritional status, as well as their associated clinical outputs. Next slide. So the main sections of the assessment that pertain to dietary and nutrition is Section K, oral and nutritional status. There's also Section G, I should say, that's specifically the ADL of eating, and that capture how well the person can feed themselves and how much help was required during the observation period. And we also have Section N, where vitamins and nutritional supplements are counted. Now, there's a user manual associated to the assessment. It's an InterRAI publication. The version we're currently using is 9.1.4 in Canada. And facilities in Ontario have access to the electronic version of this manual through an e-subscription that the Ontario Ministry of Long-Term Care has made available for facilities who are using the assessment. Next slide. So just to start off with, as we know, eating is an activity of daily living, and InterRAI defines it as how the person eats and drinks regardless of skill. It includes intake of nourishments by other means, such as tube feeding or total TPN. Now, it's based on the person's self-performance and how much help was required over a 3-day observation. Personal support workers will track episodes of eating, while the RAI assessor will score that item based on all the episodes over the last 3 days. And what you see here are the coding options that are available. Next slide. So here is a shot of, I guess, the paper form of the assessment that you see here. Next slide, please. So what you'll find different between RAI-MDS, for those of you who have used it before, and especially with Section K, you'll notice that the main difference is simplified. There's no items related to syringe feeding, therapeutic diet, diabetic diets or low salt. Dietary supplements are now going to be counted in the section of medications of the InterRAI LTCF assessment. We're not capturing the use of plate guards or stabilizing utensils and those kinds of things, or a weight change program. So it's much more simplified. We're looking at nutritional and issues combined, and the modes of nutritional intake have an expanded response set. Next slide, please. So what non-regulated staff may track daily, so our PSWs, is that person's fluid intake, how much food they're consuming, those kinds of things. So a couple of items, just to clarify those items, is we have fluid intake less than 1 liter a day. That would not apply for someone who's on a prescribed fluid restriction. This is meant to identify unintentional fluid intake less than 1 liter a day. Over to what regulated staff would assess. So there's items on dehydration that you see here. In particular, K2B, dehydrated, or BUN creatinine less than 20. So I just want to emphasize it's or. What we mean by dehydration here is clinical observable signs of dehydration. Another item I'd like to draw your attention to is fluid output exceeds input. So this also can imply clinical observations of this. So for example, if you have someone who is over the last 3 days has been vomiting or has had diarrhea and can only take little sips of water, we're not asking, or the item is not implying that measurement of ins and outs are required there. We also have some items regarding dental and oral issues, and we have one in particular that addresses chewing problems. Next slide. So one item that is of interest is K3, mode of nutritional intake. The intent of this item is to detail any dietary modifications necessary to address the swallowing difficulties of that person. You'll notice, for those of you who used MDS before, there is an expanded response set to code the mode of nutritional intake. It could be anywhere from normal to more complex tube feeding or TPN. There's also part of that set is a mix of mechanically altered diet modes that you see here. Next slide. So a few tips about this section. We do have another document here at CIHI, which provides extra coding directions that are not found in the manual. And in particular for K3, if the person requires both diet modification to swallow solid foods, and this is a question we get a lot, minced solids, and modification to swallow liquids, thickened liquids, the coding option to select would be a code of 3, requires modification to swallow liquids, because it would be assumed that if an individual has trouble with the liquids, they would also have trouble swallowing the food. Another thing to keep in mind that's quite different from RAI-MDS is we are no longer capturing IV fluids on their own or subcutaneous fluids on their own, such as hypodermoclesis. Okay, so this is not included in the assessment at all. Next slide. So K4 is where we would capture the proportion of total calories that are received either through TPN or tube feeding in the last 3 days. So we have different coding options, and I'll draw your attention to a code of 1. So this would represent maybe someone who has a parental or enteral tube in place, but they're not taking any calories over the last 3 days. It could also represent a person who took no food or fluids by mouth, but perhaps only takes sips of fluid. And the rest of the coding options are about the percentage of those calories through either one of those devices. Next slide. So section N, we now capture supplements under section N, medication. So we have an item called total number of different natural health products, including herbal and nutritional supplement, under section N4. So it's actually a count, so different ones that were taken over the last 3 days. It includes minerals, herbal supplements, meal supplements like your Boost, your Ensure, natural food supplements. It can also include probiotics and omega-3 are some examples. In terms of vitamins, InterRAI has recently changed coding direction that any individual types of vitamins would be counted under a medication count, with the exception of multivites. So that's something that has been updated just this year. Next slide, please. So from the completed assessment, we have clinical outputs that are derived, especially from section K, the oral and nutritional status. So just something new, that the term CAPS, or clinical assessment protocol, is now changing to collaborative action plan. Moving forward, InterRAI has refocused CAPS as collaborative action plans, and that's to further emphasize the inclusion of the person as part of the team when they're determining the steps needed to achieve their goal. very similar to what CAPs are before. They are not intended as automated care planning. They're designed to engage the person and the clinician in a dialogue to support a collaborative decision making. So that has not changed. Next slide. So there are three outcome scales that use items from the dietary section, so section K. First, we have the CHEST scale. It detects frailty and health instability and was designed to identify people at risk of serious decline. Higher score are associated with adverse outcomes such as mortality, hospitalization, pain, and poor self-rated health. That CHEST score is a range from 1 to 5, and the diagram depicts how the scale is calculated. In terms of our dietary items, it will factor in K2A, weight loss, and use any of the following items in K. So K2B, dehydration, or K2C, fluid less than a liter a day, or K2D, fluid output exceeds input as a count of 1, and either K2E or K2F, about decrease in food intake over the last 3 days as a count of 1 to contribute to that score. Next slide. So we have a couple of other scales. We have the fracture risk scale. It uses height and weight to derive that body mass index. It helps identify people at risk of fractures within a year. And this is more seen with people with lower BMIs. The pressure ulcer risk scale sees weight loss as a risk for developing a new pressure ulcer. Next slide. Now over to our CAPs. There are 3 main CAPs that addresses the dietary domain. We have the undernutrition CAP that focuses on the nutritional support of adults who are below their recommended ideal body weight, uses the BMI. We have dehydration, that's going to alert us for possible dehydration. And finally, the feeding tube identifies people that have a feeding tube and addresses the issues related to that use of that feeding tube and its potential removal. Next slide. The undernutrition CAP. So this CAP, there are 2 trigger levels, a high risk and medium risk, and it's based on body mass index again. You'll notice it excludes individuals who are identified as being at end of life at the time of assessment. High risks are those with a BMI less than 19. Medium risk is 19 to 21. And finally, we have the not triggered. Overall goals of care, we want to address the underlying diseases or conditions that are contributing to that undernutrition or risk of it. We want to implement a reasonable treatment plan to ensure we get adequate caloric intake for that person and preventing further weight loss and increase that person's quality of life by preventing that negative consequences of undernutrition. Next slide. Now we have the dehydration CAP. It looks at one main thing. It looks at the dehydration items and or receiving insufficient fluids in the last 3 days as low level, as you can see here at the bottom. When we get to a higher trigger level, it's those same items with the addition of any of those items that you see here on the assessment. So indications of delirium, dizziness or fever, constipation, diarrhea, vomiting, and weight loss. The overall goals of care is to treat the underlying cause of that dehydration. We want to rehydrate that person. We want to establish an appropriate approach to monitoring that person and ensure that they're recovering from this dehydration and prevent associated complications associated with having dehydration, as we can see here with the delirium and hypotensions as well as falls, as well to provide comfort. And finally, the next one is our feeding tube CAP. The feeding tube cap is based on having that tube feed in place. And the trigger levels are about that cognitive residual ability of that person. And you could see the coding here. Absence of cognitive ability, so decision making 4 or 5. 5 actually represents somebody who is comatose. So again, it's based on that residual cognitive ability. We could see the overall goals of care is really, should they have a feeding tube in place at this point in time to minimize tube feeding in advanced dementia, and to ensure the person's using a feeding tube is getting the proper care to manage that tube feeding. And we want to avoid complications. We all know that tube feeding has complications such as infection, diarrhea and cramping, blockages, leakages, and those kinds of things. And really, review periodically the appropriateness if we should continue to use tube feeding and when it would be appropriate to discontinue. So those are the main overall goals of care of those 3 caps. Next slide. And finally, we have CIHI resources that you'll find regarding some of the topics that we've covered here. We have a job aid using clinical outputs to support care planning, which is quite interesting. And we also have, obviously, the InterRAI Clinical Assessment Protocol Manual that's available from our website. Again, we'll be changing the name to that to Collaborative Action Plans. And of course, we have the manual. There's a hyperlink to the InterRAI website for that. And most importantly, we have a CIHI coding reference guide for the InterRAI long-term care facilities. Again, it provides the extra tips for all of this section in the assessment, including that section K that you will find from that document. And that's it. Thank you so much.
I'm just going to pause share the show while we do transition to the demo. Okay, so I'm logged into my training database. So just for everyone's awareness, this is completely fictitious scramble of resident information. What I'm going to walk through today is, for those of you who haven't seen the LTCF assessment yet, the looks and feel within Point Click Care, walk through what the coding looks like, how to pull information for your CAPS, as well as some of that reporting that can be completed once assessments have been finished. One of the big changes you will notice as you transition to the LTCF is the MDS tab will now become the RAI tab. This will house both of the previously completed MDS assessments as well as the new LTCF assessments as we have them going for the resident. Layout will look the same here, and you will notice the names of the assessments do change. So I do have a routine assessment opened here for Honey. This would be done as part of that 92-day routine cycle, or what we're used to with MDS as a quarterly. So as I open the assessment, you will notice that the LTCF assessment has been completed on a different platform within Point Click Care as opposed to the MDS. This is our content management platform system, and it allows for greater interoperability within the system and to perform better insights. So we did do this transition all at once. There are some similarities in terms of within the assessment now, down the left-hand side, you will see all of the sections within the LTCF assessment. So when we're looking at the information that Pat was referring to, we do have section G here for that nutritional ADL for eating documentation, as well as we've got section K as well. These red bubbles here, those highlight the number of required questions within each section of the assessment. those red bubbles will align to a red question within the assessment. So those are the things that we need to have absolutely completed to be able to lock this assessment. As we've put this assessment on a new platform, you will have access to look at diagnoses as well as medications without leaving the assessment. So we've really streamlined that workflow to allow for clinicians to look to see relevant diagnoses or medications that maybe need to be looked at and considered when coding the assessment. So really easy to stay there and do that within the body of the assessment. When we're looking at the right-hand side here, I'm going to hop over to the History tab. And what this will do is, as we complete assessments on the residents, it will provide for us a running log of the previous answers to that assessment. So we're able to, again, see what was documented with the previous assessment to understand if there's been a change or not. So as we get into some of these questions, you will see where that history can come into play. We have also leveraged the ability to pull in specific demographic information into the resident assessment. So it will pull in information that is less likely to change over a period of time, and there will sometimes be limitations. So when we're looking at the weights and vitals, those will auto-populate from the weights and vitals tab as long as they're completed within the appropriate time frame. So if we're looking at that 30 days, it will pull in that weight and height from the 30 days prior. As we look through the body of the assessment, you'll see here that I do have the ability to capture, if residents are palliative, if they're refusing to have height and weight documented. And then as we go through in follow-up to Pat's demonstration of some of the coding elements, you'll see here where those requirements do come into play. And as we're working through and completing this assessment, we have our yes, no responses for what's present during that look back period. And we're able to navigate through the assessment. Again, I'm able to understand what is required for documentation here, looking to capture if there is that parental intake. The one change is section L is for the teeth and oral care has been moved into the bottom of section K. So that is something that will be found here with the LTCF assessment. So again, looking to understand the most appropriate coding for the resident related to their dental and oral care. I will flag for you as well, when I opened this assessment, the resident had the fact that they wear dentures was previously coded. In addition to this pulling information from the Weights and Vitals portal, as well as some of that demographic information, it will pull information from that care profile. And that care profile is on the resident page. And things like glasses, hearing aids, dentures, if we populate there, there is that push-pull automation between there. So as we're working through and completing the assessment, you'll notice the save and next, save, sign, and exit, save, sign, and lock. That has all disappeared with the transition to the LTCF assessment. We do have the ability to come here to skip to the next section, which works similarly to working down the left-hand side of the screen. I can finish later if I need to get to something else. And you'll notice a grayed out complete button. I'm not able to complete that assessment yet, as I still have some red outstanding elements here from the other assessment sections that do need to be answered. But what I wanted to show you is the CAPS documentation. So currently the CAPS do sit at the end of the assessment. So similar to section V of the RAI MDS assessment. And we have at the top here the comprehensive list of CAPS that have been triggered based on the documentation of this assessment. And the clinicians would come in here and just, again, check off which CAPS are applicable for further review and analysis. You may be wondering, where does that information come from? So we're going to go there first to show you how we're going to document that CAPS information. So I'm back on my residence home screen. You'll see beside the ARD for the assessment that we're in an outputs link. If you click on this output link, so I'm going to maximize this screen. You'll see that I have what mimics the outcome summary report with MDS. So I'm here, I'm able to see elements of the outcome scales that have been populated based on the assessment, the caps that have been triggered with some rationale behind the triggering of those caps. I'm also able to see again here some other information around the BMI, age at assessment, and some calculations into the RUG scoring. So when I look at the completion of this assessment right now, if I'm looking at the caps that Pat spoke to, I see that feeding tube has not been triggered. And based on what's been completed thus far of the assessment, I don't have a trigger yet for dehydration or undernutrition. However, if you do see that a cap has been triggered, it will begin to expand with a little bit of information as to why that cap is triggered if we reflect back to what Pat had shared with us. So you're going to come to this report, gather that information, and then come back into the assessment and towards that bottom on the left-hand side, going to that caps section here. What we currently have in the system right now is once we've selected off the caps we're going to document on, it is a narrative box that allows you to kind of complete that documentation specific to what has triggered for that cap, the impact that it has on the resident, and how we're going to plan accordingly for adjustments to the resident's plan of care. So here I would just, again, document free text for now, what that impact is on the resident as well as the care planning interventions. We are looking to build this out a little bit for future enhancements, so more information to come with that section. So we've looked at, the completion of the assessment, how to get that outputs report. What I want to look at now are some of the other reports that will trigger an impact for the facility. So we've got the outputs link that will give us the individual resident outcomes. But if we're looking to run information for all the residents within the home over the quarter, we do have a couple of different options. So we do have the LTCF caps and outcome scales report. And within this report, so you'll see this one is solely exportable to Excel to allow for that further reconfiguration, formatting to do some further drill down and analysis. Our filters, again, we can leave them as open to include as many residents as possible. And there's also that ability to kind of shrink that look back period down if we desire to do that with our filters. So if I run that report, it will produce for me a Excel document. And I'm just going to open that document here. Okay. So we'll see the Excel document has opened up here on my screen. We're just going to walk through. You will see that this is a 4-page document. The first page is really just giving you some of the parameters and demographic information of that report, of the filters that were used to generate it. The caps will provide for you, again, depending on the filters that we have set, all of the caps that have triggered for the resident. And you'll notice I'll draw your attention to this very top row here in the Excel where we have codes. These codes align to the quality indicators. And that was one area that we didn't look at necessarily in terms of the outputs. We're still working to build out that quality indicator report, and knowing that some indicators do require the two assessments to draw that comparison to. What we've done is we have mapped the codes of applicable quality indicators to the CAP area as well as the outcome scales, to support the likeliness that the resident may have also triggered the quality indicator until we're able to get that information into either the quality indicator report from the clinical reports, or we have those two assessments from a comparison position. So if I come over to my nutrition related areas, you'll see I have my undernutrition cap here that is looking at and has been mapped to the weight loss quality indicator. So if we have a trigger here for that undernutrition cap, most likely would have had that triggering for the quality indicator as well. And if I look at the feeding tube cap, you'll see that same code up there for the quality indicator for resident that does have a feeding tube. If I come over to the outcome scales report, similar functionality as the CAPS, where we have mapped out some of those data elements that do have correlation to the coding that would likely promote the likeliness of a quality indicator being triggered as well. So with this, we don't have any residents that have populated the chest score that would reflect back. So, but again, really important here with this report to know kind of what those triggers are within the specific assessment to understand what the likeliness of that quality indicator being triggered. So that's your outcome scale report, again, allowing you to have that information for the entire resident population or a subset based on a home area or floor. For those homes that do have the Performance Insights module, there is the ability to see information populate into the Performance Insights module. It will populate for you overnight any export ready, exported, or submitted assessments into the Performance Insight tab. So you're able to have real-time review of your residents' quality indicators from that Performance Insights tab. And this training database, unfortunately, doesn't have that set up, but it would look very similar to what you're seeing with your Performance Insights from your MDS reporting right now. So I'm going to just pause again here and pull up the presentation for Leanne.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah. I've been taking notes. I thought I knew everything, but apparently not. So this has been great. So through OSNAC, we have a variety of best practice documents on our website. And Sarah, I'll get you to go to the next slide, please. So if you haven't been to our website before, this is what it looks like when you log on. I've got the address link in the slides, but it's osnac.fnat.com. The purpose of our best practice documents are to support regulatory compliance in Ontario, promote optimal nutrition and hydration, and support person-centered care. The best practice documents are based on resources and expertise from industry professionals, and where applicable are evidence-based. They're all living documents that will transition with the evolution of the industry over time. So we've got a variety of content within the best practice link on our website. There's a variety of topics, including clinical nutrition topics like liberalized diets, diabetes, consent to treatment, skin and wound, and many more. Also included in the best practice section are documents related to menu planning and some regulatory supports as well. So OSNAC, of course, has collaborated with CIHI on an InterRAI LTCF best practice document. So over the next couple of slides, thank you, we will take a look at some of the content. So this is what the InterRAI LTCF best practice document looks like. It's a very general overview of LTCF. It reviews some of the background around why LTCF is being used and the history and development of the program. The best practice document reviews some of the differences between MDS and LTCF, including some of the changes in the timelines and submission dates. There's a brief overview of the nutrition and hydration related coding questions that Patricia went through, and some of the nutrition related CAP triggers that we already reviewed. The document provides some guidelines around nutrition care assessments as well. And through OSNAC, we are recommending to complete a comprehensive nutrition assessment, whether it's in a standalone template or some sort of progress note. Next slide, please. So care planning is also reviewed in the best practice document, and discussion around how the CAP triggers help to identify any nutrition problems or potential problems, which then should be highlighted and care planned around with goals and interventions. It is also highlighted in the best practice document that there are many variations amongst licensees and organizations around the roles and responsibilities for completing the InterRAI LTCF. So the RD, nutrition manager, or designate, they all have varying job routines, budgeted time, and skill sets. So each organization may develop a system or policies related to responsibilities of completing the InterRAI LTCF. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and each organization is a little bit unique in that sense. The key concept is that the process must align with the timeline set out by the Ministry of Health and the CIHI coding criteria. So the best part about the best practice document is that we've compiled a list of resources and tools with direct links to the resources right within the document. So CIHI, as Patricia has mentioned, has a lot of great job aids and resources that can be used. So we've included all of those within the best practice document in one clean area so that you're able to access those quite easily. So if you haven't had a chance, please check out our website. There's a lot of great content there, and this new InterRAI LTCF best practice document. And I'll pass it back to Tara. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leanne. Just before we jump into the Q&A session, as you can see on the screen, we invite you to follow us, OSNAC FNAT, on our various social media platforms. So with that, we will move to the question and answer period. If you do have any questions and you'd like to enter them into the Q&A section, please do so now. And our first question, when assessing a resident, this individual completes a thorough nutrition assessment as well. If a CAP is triggered, can I put a note to refer to that assessment in the CAP instead of actually completing the note in the CAP? Any thoughts from the group on that?
I can answer that question. As long as in your assessment you are acknowledging that a CAP was triggered and that you're assessing whatever that trigger is, you can do that in a standalone nutrition care assessment. And then just in your CAP, you're basically referring to that documentation. So we always want to try to prevent double documentation as much as possible. So, we don't want to waste time documenting everything in a CAP and then also having to do a nutrition care assessment with a more robust assessment. So it's fair that you can simply refer to the assessment.
The next question is, do we still have 7 days to code after the observation period?
So my understanding is that you do. So there's some variation in when the observation period can be set, especially for new admissions. The observation period now is only 3 days, but it can be set anywhere, I believe, from day 3 or day 7 from when the resident moves in. Then your coding and your CAPS has to be completed by day 7 of the ARD date. So you pretty much have a full week from the end of that observation period to when your coding and CAPS is completed. And if you're completing a nutrition care assessment, instead of actually documenting in the CAPS, you're just referring to your assessment, that's going to follow in on that same CAP timeline. And then your care plan, you have another week after that to update the care plan and lock it. So that has to be done by day 14 of the ARD. And all of those timelines are set up by the ministry. And again, each organization, each community may have a little variations with things. I know some communities, they've actually even tightened up from their ARD to when they want their coding and CAPS done, because the RAI coordinators have to audit everything and have such a timely submission. Sometimes, they want it done by day 5 of the ARD, so the RAI coordinator has a couple days to make sure everything is completed prior to submission.
Thanks, Leanne. The next question is are there any paper resources to capture all the non-regulated info being entered for those using point-click here daily? As of now, the majority of charting is done on paper.
So I know we don't have any paper resources through OSNAC necessarily. So this would be organizational specific. So based on what documentation that your organization is using, then you would document on your paper form.
Okay. If anybody else has any questions, please enter them into the chat. Oh, here we go. The InterRAI LTCF does not track the annual assessment to be completed by the dietitian for high as well as the moderate risk assessments.
I can answer this one because I had a very hard time wrapping my head around this change. Yeah, and it's a pretty popular question that many people have had. So there's no regulatory requirement that every resident has to be seen on an annual basis by the dietitian. So technically, we don't need to be seeing everybody annually. So now without the annual assessments, some organizations are just having the RDs assess their residents on their routine high assessments, as well as any significant change assessments. Most organizations also have weight intake and hydration monitoring policies and processes in place. So in the event that a resident is changing in terms of their nutritional intake, that would flag the nurses and they could send the dietitian a referral. Also, if you're taking that approach, it's really wise to do some education with the DDSs and FSSs so that they're really clear around any red flags when they're doing their routine moderate or low nutrition risk assessments. Now, saying that, some organizations still want people, dietitians, to see residents annually. It's kind of hard to time that within the LTCF because timelines can move depending if somebody was in the hospital or if there's a significant change of status. So you'd kind of have to keep a separate document based on the resident's move-in or admission date, and then be just doing some sort of progress note or assessment on that annual basis.
Thank you. Any other questions? What kind of information do we write in the caps other than addressing what was triggered? Could we get an example, please?
Yeah, so I know typically what we have been doing is we've been using a standalone nutrition care assessment. It seems like a lot of the larger chains have gone that route. So within caps, we're simply referring to the nutrition care assessment. And within our nutrition care assessment template, we do have a spot that says, were any caps triggered? What were those caps? So you're kind of discussing it there. But Patricia, I don't know if you have any other recommendations in terms of cap documentation.
No, really, it's up to each facility how they want to do their documentations for care planning. We, based on the trigger levels, the actual CAPS manual, when you look at it for each cap, you've got the problem, the triggers, and the guidelines. And then from the guidelines, you could use some of what they've got in terms of guidelines to create that documentation for the particular cap that got triggered. So again, the caps are really not automated care plans, but they provide the guidelines on how to put the necessary interventions into that care plan.
Yeah. Thank you.
We do have an individual who's raised their hand. I'm not sure if they're unable to unmute or if they're able to unmute themselves and ask the question, or if it should go into the chat. I will go to the next question in the chat while we figure that out. Can you show us how Section V in InterRAI looks compared to RAI 2.0?
I can try to answer that one. So Section V is not something that is submitted to CIHI. It's the area where I believe it's where the signature goes into the person completing the assessment or the people that have contributed to the assessment. And for InterRAI LTCF is just one signature that's required, but that's not a section that actually comes through CIHI, at least not with RAI MDS that we were aware of. So a little different.
Yes, and I think the signature piece in the RAI MDS used to be Section R. So just like Tricia was saying, that now there's just the final signature that's being submitted, and that each person involved in the assessment doesn't actually need to sign. But Section V in MDS used to be the RAP section. So now it's the CAP section, and that's what Sarah went over in her live demo in terms of the CAP section and some of the features of that.
Great. So Mary Marceline, if you would like to unmute yourself, you can ask your question. Okay. Maybe we'll move to the next chat question while Mary's trying to figure that out. Section R is signature, not V. Section V is for 12, nutritional status.
Yeah. So I think I answered that one in my last comment.
Yes, thank you.
I did have a question myself that actually came up when we were presenting. So for Sarah, in terms of the the undernutrition cap now kind of generating a QI, essentially. It's going to be that same code like we had before for weight loss, the WGT01 code. So now it's going to trigger for anybody that triggered undernutrition. So I'm assuming anybody with a BMI of 21 or less, who's not kind of end stage disease, that would trigger that QI.
I don't have on me right available what the triggers are. We did a likeliness. It wasn't an exact compilation and comparator. It was based on how close could we get to the likeliness that a QI would trigger based on some of that coding. So I don't definitively have the parameters for me for that QI. Can get them to you to share out to the group, but don't think that it was meant to be fully aligned, just more of a general based on the information that we had early on with the assessment process.
Okay, great. And then eventually down the road, I'm assuming we'll have kind of provincial data as time goes on that we'll be able to compare to.
Yeah, I can answer that. So with the quality indicators, the inclusion for that particular quality indicator and the exclusion criteria, we have specifications on that. And if anybody's interested on how it's calculated, please send us an email at specializedcare@kaihai.ca if you want some more information about how that QI is calculated. We'd be happy to answer that. For the reporting purposes. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
And I believe Mary is able to unmute now. You want to go ahead? I thought third time was going to be a charm, but maybe not. There are no further questions in the chat. If anybody does have any final questions, please type them in now. Okay, next slide, please. Definitely some great questions for sure. So that wraps up today's webinar event. A big thank you to each and every one of you for attending. Your engagement and curiosity makes events like this meaningful. Also, thank you to Kaihai and Point Click Care, Sarah and Patricia, for collaborating with us on this webinar. Again, please keep an eye out for the survey that we'll be sending your way. Your feedback is crucial for helping us improve and tailor our future events to your interests. We genuinely want to hear from you, so thank you.